I'm going to give you 2 videos of IEM mixing secrets that I use to get a high-profile singer back on both ear monitors. Tips, tricks, secrets, techniques, clickbait. I accepted a gig about 10 years ago where I became a monitor engineer for a very, very talented singer who had taken a hiatus, had lost his monitor engineer after not working for several years, and was looking for someone to come out and be his monitor engineer. Now, this singer knows how to sing, very talented, and any of his gigs could be just his vocal and a piano, or anywhere from 3 inputs to 153 inputs. And he'll be called in to do TV shows, award shows, benefits, fundraisers, all kinds of things like that. So as a monitor engineer, I had to be ready to provide him a comfortable experience no matter what the situation was, whether I was mixing, whether I was talking to the union engineer, whether I was talking to the broadcast engineer about what he needed to hear for his monitoring. This all came into play with one of these secrets I'm about to show you right now. When I got the gig, it was a combination of 1 ear monitor plus wedges, and I totally understand where he was coming from. He felt that he was too isolated wearing 2 ears. He started using wedges more and felt more comfortable that way. I mean, once again, he has a big voice and very well trained. And so I had to consider the situation where he was standing in his practice room, in his living room, practicing these songs, hearing his voice out in the open, not through ear monitors, not through a microphone. So when I took the gig, I asked him if he wanted to go to 2 ears. He said no. We had a short conversation. I completely understood where he was going. Fast forward a couple of years, and he came to trust me more. He knew that whatever crazy situation we were in, I would be able to provide for him whatever he needed to be able to perform at his top level. On the screen here on the left-hand side, you see that it is actually labeled lead 2 ear. What I did with this console file was actually set up a macro that would switch mixes that was being sent to his PSM 1000. So if I had to go back to his single ear mix, I could hit the macro. It would be his single ear mix. I would bring the wedges on. If he was comfortable and he wanted to go to both ear monitors, I would flip the macro. His ear monitors would be driven by the stereo IEM mix I was providing, and the other mix would just not go anywhere. Now, if he was on 2 ears, I would actually turn the wedges off. I would mute the mixes, and we would go from there. When dealing with high-profile artists, you have to be ready for curveballs. There is no way I was going to delete that single ear IEM mix and just hope for the best. I had to be prepared, so this is what I came up with. You see the output EQ I applied. We were using Westone ES60s, which keep the mid-range in. With a vocalist, you want the intelligibility, and you're also going to have some low-end coming back to you from the PA. Keeping low frequency controlled in the ear monitor is actually a benefit for vocalists. Now, here's the thing. You see a vocal ear, a vocal crush, a vocal band, vocal plate, vocal room, vocal wedge input strip. They are taking, if you notice at the top, the same input. We are taking the AES output of a wireless transmitter, a Shure Axient. Front of house and recording, we use parallel compression all the time. In the old days, we would actually just put Y cables in the back of the doghouse if we wanted to take the same input to multiple input channels. Now we do it digitally by just assigning that same input to multiple strips. With vocalists, you need to be very careful. You need to compress their vocal a little bit. It is ear monitors, and there's only so much dynamic range that ear monitors will handle. But you don't want to compress it to the point where the singer feels it. If they're pushing against the compressor, they end up straining their voice and pushing too hard to get back what they need to hear. One trick is to use a very light compression, like 1.5 to 1, and have a really early threshold. So they're always kind of singing into it. I would never do a 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, a limiter on their vocal. I would never do that. Part of what you need to do as a monitor engineer is actually take the vocal mic yourself, listen to their pack, and listen to see if you still have articulation. The power behind your front teeth and the roof of your mouth needs to stay consistent. So even by saying the word teeth, consistent, intelligibility, all that, that T sound needs to be there and needs to be powerful. If the singer doesn't have that intelligibility, that articulation, they're going to feel like their tongue is heavy and it's going to tire them out during their performance. At front of house and in recording, certainly we use parallel compression on outputs. But what do you do if you don't have enough outputs to run parallel vocals? Also, if you're driving ear monitors, how are you going to do this? Are you going to run 2 stereo outputs into a matrix and the matrix feeds the singer's ear pack? Latency is your enemy with all of this. If you're old enough to remember how ear monitors sounded through an analog console or an analog chain, and then compare it to a digital console, which even has 1 millisecond, 1.5 millisecond latency, there is a big difference that you're going to feel in your head. So in order to come up with something, I went to the input strips. This singer will sing full voice. He'll go into falsetto. Don't misunderstand me. His falsetto is as strong as a lot of other people's full voice. But what he was asking me to do was to push his falsetto just a little bit so that he could still have the power in there, or what he perceived as the power. I would do the fader move, but I also started to do something here. Vocal ear and vocal crush, they are the same. If you look at the input EQs, I had a boost right here at 2.55. And what that actually did was give me, when I took his microphone with my ear monitors and his pack, and I talked into it and made vocal sounds, I wanted a buzz happening right here at the bridge of my nose. I wanted to feel that power right up here. Sweeping the frequencies, I found that frequency to be the one that I needed with that model of ear monitor and that model of microphone. The high pass is different. 284 for the vocal crush, 153 for his other vocal. These run in parallel, right? You see there's no compression on his main vocal that's feeding ear monitors. And this one, it is stacked compression. See one compressor here that kicks in at 8.49 milliseconds, releases at 52.7. And before that one releases, this other one will kick in as well, 29.4, and releases at 104. 10 to 1 on this one, 4.43 on this one. You don't hear the compression really hit in because, remember, as I said, I'm running these in parallel. You still get the dynamic range of that first one, but you get the presence and the closeness of this second one. However, when he really got on it and sang full voice, that vocal crush moved out of the way because the compression pulled it out. But when he got lighter and went to his falsetto, that crush came in to supplement the level of his vocal. If you haven't tried it, try it. I know many of you don't have the luxury of having a Digico or an Avid S6L with all kinds of crazy routing. You're dealing with X32s and M32s. Buses are at a premium, but if you have vocal strips that you can actually mult in here, give this a shot. This will help your singer stay above the noise and all the chaos that's in there. Now, what I also want to show you is the vocal crush would actually go to his 2-ear mix, his 1-ear mix, but nowhere else. He would be the only one that would have it. The strip entitled Vocal Band, that was strictly the lead vocalist for the rest of the band. It was heavily compressed. It also had more high frequency added to it, so it would sit beneath the instrumentalist's mix and still be present for them so they could hear what was going on. And then there's also vocal wedge. So now, as I said, if he went to the 1-ear mix, I would turn the wedges on. If he was on the 2 ears, the wedge outputs would actually come down. But here's the deal. At first, I had sent his vocal ear monitor strip to the reverb, but there's all that extra high frequency boost in there. So the verbs were being kind of tinny and they weren't sounding very well. What I decided to do was take this strip, the vocal wedge strip, which has a much tamer and more or less damage control EQ on it, because it was going to wedges. And I sent that to the vocal verbs. Vocal verbs. We'll talk about this in the next video. So this channel actually sent post fade. So it sends post fade to the wedges, to the piano wedge, these are also wedge mixes, all that right there. And also sends post fader to the vocal verb. One vocal verb auxiliary fed 2 units. So now the added benefit is between songs when he was talking to the audience, I could pull this vocal wedge fader down. His verbs would die out. If the wedges were on, his vocal would also die out in the wedges, and he would just be talking through his ear monitor to the audience. And I wouldn't have to worry about him if he dropped his microphone for feedback or any of that stuff. But this was an added benefit in order to be able to strip the extra vocal verb out when he was talking to the audience, so it didn't sound all washy. So you may not have enough outputs, and routing multiple outputs into one ear monitor transmitter can be unsightly. So try it on the input. I went this route as opposed to using a piece of hardware because Like I said, I would have to show up at TV shows, at radio stations, at TV stations, and I would have to be able to talk to the engineer and describe to them. It was much easier for me to say, hey, double up his vocal and let's treat it this way, than to try to bring in a piece of hardware, patch it. You're not going to have that. The engineer is not going to let you do that. This is how we got around it. So try it. And if it works for you, leave a comment, please. Stay tuned for the next video where I talk about those vocal verbs.